It's 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. You know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi's Quarantini Happy Hour. Almost did the wrong intro. Woo-hoo! Big show today. Very exciting show. Thank you, Fake Band. They never drop a beat. And thank you, Fake Audience. Let's see who's in that chat room. There they are. Showing up. Let's see who we've got here. We have Martin Gravel, Bob Gunnerfelt, Akira Canyon, Darren Fletcher, Nancy Colell. They're trickling in ever so slowly. Alex Dillon. Hello, Alex. Hello, Dan Weber. Sherry Marcus Milano. Hello. Dean Turner. Andre Stepanian, Jesse J. Peck, woo! You know, I think it's funny. It seems like, hello, Pete Mason, Alan McCool, Peter Rahill. It seems like every time I do the show, you know, we've got these three squirrels that are clearly young and they're clearly siblings. And I swear, they must wait to hear the Taxi TV theme song or hear me say, you know, it's 4 o'clock on whatever day it is. As soon as I do that, man, they show up on the patio, start running around. Let's see. K-Quest, hello from Baltimore. Wow. Tony Salazzo. Pete Mason. All right. The gang is all here. Well, not all here, but many are here. The squirrels want to be on TV. I guess one day I should just turn, yeah, they are Pavlov squirrels. I should just turn the camera around and tilt it down at the patio and let you guys watch the squirrels for an hour. Hello, Mark Reel. I'm excited about this show today. It's going to be something, 10 years of doing Taxi TV live streams. I've never had this guy on, and we're actually good friends. We've known each other since at least the beginning of Taxi, I think. He was one of our original screeners. He used to be an A&R guy. I can't remember where. I want to say Geffen at some point in his life. They're attracted to nuts, but they don't even know you guys. Maybe it's me. Anyway, Rich and I go way, way back, and we only talk maybe, I don't know, once or twice a year, but we've remained great friends. And he's one of those guys where we always seem to pick up right where we left off. But you know, the other day I talked to him, I don't know, maybe a week ago or so, and we were on the phone for like 2 hours and 25 minutes. It's just time flies. So I said to him, what do you want to talk about? Now, he's not a mystery man. I already gave his name out, Ritch Esra. Yeah, her send-off was heartwarming and bittersweet. I mean, technically she doesn't work for us anymore, but for the next couple of weeks she's still on full-time on the staff, and then when she gets settled in Indiana, she's going to be doing the outbound phone calls for the for a project we're doing, and then hopefully for the road rally as well. So anyway, yeah, we miss her already. This was my first day of no talkie to Bria. But, you know, Ariana's on the case, and she's got it covered. Covered really, really well, I might add. Yeah, Bria was very cool. Yes, she was. Hello, Renz. Hello, Robert. Hello, Ian. Hello, Jan. So, yeah, Ritch Esra, who will be joining us in a minute or two, is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met as far as kind of like the inner workings of the record industry side of things and the big publisher side of things. I guess I'm getting a tickle in my throat and I feel like I'm going to sneeze, and no, it's not the COVID. It is because Bria, as kind of a little bit of a gag gift, but something practical, Bria knows that when I put the powder on my forehead to get rid of the shine, which I didn't do very well today apparently, that I take the little pad thing and just rub it around like that. She's like, no, that's not how you do it. So as her thank you present to me when she left, she got me a new thing of powder. Every man should have some. And a brush. It's not just any brush, though. It's a retractable brush. So it doesn't mess up the other stuff in my purse. Anyway, that powder is like, it left a cloud when I put it on about 20 minutes ago, and I think the cloud is still here. Yep, that is Ariana. Man powder. You know, you got to wonder, with all the lawsuits going around for Johnson & Johnson talcum powder, I wonder if there's talcum powder in facial powder. Don't know. Puffy Daddy, there you go. Anyway, let me call Rich. Super, super nice guy. You'll see he's got one of the coolest, he's got such a great voice. His way of speaking is so awesome. His voice is so distinctive. We have another mutual friend that does an imitation of Rich so incredibly well that when the other friend calls me and pretends he's Rich, I don't know. Okay, let me see if I can operate my phone today. Keypad, there we go.
Music registry.
Hello, Rich. It's Michael. How are you?
Hey, Michael. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. You are live on Taxi TV. I've got my
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got my phone right next to the microphone. Can you guys all hear Rich pretty well? Say something, Rich.
Hey, everybody. How you doing today?
It takes a minute.
Is that loud enough, or no?
Yeah, I think that's going to be great.
Okay, great.
Yep, everybody's saying sounds good. So I just gave them a little background on you. Where did you used to do A&R back in the day? Was it Geffen?
No, it was at Arista.
Arista, that's right.
Yeah.
You actually
Arista
worked for
out here on the West Coast.
Yeah, and you actually used to know, or still know, and worked for Clive Davis, right?
That's correct. Yes, I did. He was the head of A&R, so to speak, and I learned most of what I know, at the beginning of my career from him.
Wow, what an auspicious beginning to a career that must have been, or is.
Well, it was. I mean, I didn't know any different. The thing that I remember in the years looking back was he taught me such good habits. He taught me things that I still use in my career today. He taught me the value of never taking anything for granted. I mean, this was the guy who, every songwriter in the world wanted to get their songs to him. And he never looked at it as like, oh, they'll come to me. He searched out every new songwriter and wanted to hear about them. Every time a song would, enter the charts, he would seek out that writer if he didn't know them. He wouldn't wait till they came to him. He would seek them out. So it was really, really interesting in that regard. And then I also learned the value of reading and keeping abreast of what's going on in the business. He was voracious about that. He still is. So, I mean, those are just some of the things that I took from him that were really, really, really valuable.
Twice I've tried to get him to be our Lifetime Achievement Award honoree at the Road Rally. And the first time his assistant just said, nope, he's not going to be on the West Coast at that time. And the second time, he actually sent me back a letter, a paper letter in the mail. Saying, I'm so sorry, I know you've asked before. Unfortunately, he wasn't feeling that well at the time. He said, it was probably about 3 months out. I think I sent him a heads up about 11 months out. And then I sent him something 3 months out saying, so you never got back to me, but I'd still really love to have you. The audience would eat it up, blah, blah, blah. These are other people I've had. And he sent me back just a 3-sentence letter to say, I really appreciate you asking me. He was such a gentleman about it. So, man, oh man, some people deserve a long career, and he's and an illustrious one, and he is certainly in that group of people.
Yes, he always was. That is something I've always noticed. I always knew about him when working with him, is that, he always responded to people. I mean, there are very few people in that league. Him and Irving Azoff were two people who, really had this thing in their professional careers where every, correspondence and every phone call is always to be returned. I mean, they were like big sticklers about that. You just didn't ignore things. And it's always interesting because, I hear that from so many people, the kind of story you said where he got back to them or he wrote them a note or, something where he acknowledged what they had to say and responded. I mean, I've heard that from songwriters and artists as well.
Name off just some of the people that he broke. I'm not sure everybody's aware of like careers that he built, and obviously.
Oh my God! Well, it goes back to like the Columbia days. Janis Joplin, Blood, Sweat and Tears. Who else?
Whitney Houston.
Sly and the Family Stone.
Wow.
What was the other one he signed? I mean, you can see them all in the documentary, Clive, the Soundtrack of My Life. Whitney Houston, Manilow, God, who else? I mean, there were so many. Just trying to think of, the Columbia ones. I mean, Springsteen happened under him, although that was John Hammond signing.
Right.
Aerosmith, he signed when he was at Columbia. Trying to think, who else? God, I'm just blanking on it. Yeah, there's so many. I mean, but if you're interested, I mean, you can always check that documentary out. It's on, I think it's on Epix or it's on Netflix. The thing of his life, which goes into all of them. It's called Clive Davis, the Soundtrack of My Life.
Oh, Ariana, who's producing the show today remotely, says he signed Lady Gaga, which I was unaware of.
That's not true, actually, because he doesn't work for Universal.
Okay.
That's a different label. He was Sony. Gaga was signed under L.A. Reid and then got moved over to Interscope.
That's right.
Nothing to do with Clive. I'm sure he wishes he signed her, but yeah.
Who is the very pretty African-American singer?
Alicia Keys.
Alicia Keys. That was...
Alicia Keys, yes.
That might have been
he did sign her.
His last, really huge signing, right?
Because, here's an interesting story about her was that she was signed prior. She was signed prior to Columbia Records, made a record that, was I think, finished or nearly finished, and then they dropped her when a regime change happened. They dropped her, they dropped 50 Cent, they dropped, a couple of other acts that were, on the roster that they just, either listened to, they didn't hear the potential or whatever. And that's an unusual situation. I mean, the same thing happened to Katy Perry. She had, I think, a couple record deals before she broke, but nothing ever came out.
Oh, that's because she hadn't yet worked as a screener at Taxi. Did I ever tell you that? Did you know that Katy worked as a screener for almost a year at Taxi?
Absolutely, yes, you did tell me that. Absolutely, yes, she was a screener at Taxi during that period, right around that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, she was between record deals, and Jason Flom signed her, or called her, actually, while she was at Taxi in a screening cubicle, and she ran out to the hallway, out the front door by the ladies' room, and she came back in, and she just walked into my office, kind of, knocked on the door politely, walked in, and just looked a little stunned, and she said, I just got signed to another record deal, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to work here anymore, but thank you. And
wow.
that was the end of that. And then years later, probably 4 or 5 years ago, she called me up, and she was in Sweden writing with Max Martin, and she called me up and she said, I don't think I ever really properly thanked you. And she told me the story about how she was so broke that her car had been repoed, and she had to rent a car from Rent-A-Wreck every time she came out to screen, and if not for Taxi, she literally wouldn't have been able to eat. It's pretty
oh my God,
heartwarming, and I was grateful to get the call. But
wow, that's a wonderful story. That is so great. Yeah, that she did that. I knew that she had worked at Taxi. I didn't know that story, though. That's fantastic. It's always great when people don't forget.
And knowing you'll never forget that story. Rich has the most incredible memory, I think, of any of my friends. I swear to God, I remember when you had the house in Studio City, and Deb and I and Rob and Teresa came over, maybe for a 4th of July party or your birthday party or something.
I think it was my birthday, yeah.
Yeah, and You recounted some story that had to be from like 20 years prior to that. You remembered every little detail. I can't remember the story myself now, but that was the first time I became aware that you have like an elephant memory. So you're lucky.
Oh God.
I mean, I think we're somewhat close in age, and I find at my age that, I always joke and say, make my kids wear name tags to dinner. Um, but you,
Yeah, oh, no, I know what you mean. I mean, I'm conscious of that too, Michael. I'm conscious of the fact that years ago, I think I used to have a better memory than I do now. But
yeah, but
I've always prided myself on my memory.
you have a remarkable capacity to remember like everything, every person, what their position was in 1994 at this label, and who they signed, and why they got bounced out of the label, and the political machinations, all that stuff. Oh, speaking of people that we both know well from our past, I'm acting like nobody in the audience is there. It's just you and I.
Yeah.
But Bud Scapa, I haven't talked to him in years. And I was, his wife does the transcriptions of our road rally panels that become the stuff that goes in our newsletter. So Peggy and I've known each other through email for 20 years, and we've never actually met in real life.
Oh wow! Because I used to know Peggy when I worked with Bud back in the early '80s.
She's a super sweet lady in an email. I think I spoke to her on the phone maybe once or twice.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, I remember telling Bud once he didn't deserve her, and he didn't think that was funny. Anyway, I haven't talked to him in so long, so she gave me a cell number. I'm going to call him and get him on the show, because there's another guy that just, he's got an incredible capacity to remember all this kind of, not just music industry stuff, but the music industry people behind the scenes. He knows everything.
Absolutely, and he is so intelligent and so bright and so knowledgeable. I can't say enough about him. He was such a wonderful guy. I mean, when I used to work with him at Arista, and then I kept in touch with him over the years. I think he's still at not Music Connection, but Hits, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, and he's somewhere else as well. But yeah, he's still at Hits magazine, which, for those of you who've never seen it, it's kind of like it's the one magazine real people in the real industry actually pay attention to. It's mostly just an industry publication. And it has survived when other publications have fallen by the wayside. But yeah, Bud Scapa, who I will have on the show shortly, has interviewed, if there's a famous rock and roll star, at some point Bud has interviewed them for either Billboard,
absolutely, yeah,
Rolling Stones, Spin, just every magazine you can think of. He's a legit world-class rock journalist.
And he was a world-class rock journalist long before he ever got into A&R, too. I mean, that's, he started at Crawdaddy and some of those great early publications prior to his career as an A&R person. Okay,
so let's see if you remember. Where did he do A&R?
He did A&R at Arista, and then he did it at, what was that guy? Lou Malia's label, Zoo.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Zoo Records, which was through RCA, and then he did, I think he did it for one other label, and I'm blanking on which label it was.
Not
and then
critical.
He did journalism. Huh?
Not critical that you remember. I do remember he worked at Taxi for about 3 years as a screener. And I remember one day we got a complaint about a critique. Somebody said, this guy clearly doesn't understand rock music. So I took his name off his resume and sent it to the guys. Really? Anyway, that was fun. So let's talk about the music industry and how, the just unbelievable changing landscape that it's gone through over the last decade or so, and where are we at now? So let's start with the changes over the last decade or even 15 years.
Well, I think that probably the greatest. I always say in my classes that I think that one of the greatest change happened when we went from a copy model of vinyl and cassette and CD to an access model. And that's when we went, from purchasing stuff to a model where we just accessed music. That was the greatest change. That was revolutionary. And the reason that was revolutionary, and that didn't happen until it started here in America in 2011, 2012. And I think the revolutionary part of that is that it changed our entire value system around music. It changed our entire relationship to music. No longer did we have to buy it. We now had access to anything and everything that was ever recorded. You could get music wherever you wanted, however you wanted, on whatever device you wanted, wherever you were in the world, and you could do it for free. And that really changed the relationship, I think, to music. And, in a sense, it devalued it. In terms of, and I say devalued in the sense of it devalued it to what we knew music to be. Music was something that we heard or was referred to us or that we got, fell in love with by a record, and then we went out and bought it. And that was the end of the relationship. I mean, nobody ever knew if we listened to that record once, twice, 1,000 times, whatever. They just knew that we purchased it. With streaming, you can at least see how many times somebody listens to. And that's part of the revolution, I think, which changed the dynamic of culture's relationship to music, is that we no longer were involved in the purchase of something like music and paying for it. It now was a question of attention. How much attention can something get? And that became commodity in the music business. And those are, I think, probably the two biggest changes in revolution. And by the way, I don't think that it just affected music. I think that whole concept around attention affected everything in media. I mean, look at television. You and I come from a 3-channel universe.
Yes,
literally. And then we had cable, and then we had, satellite, and then and now what we have, nobody even can tell you because it's too much. It's endless. It's on and on and on and on and on.
And, part of the relationship we had, I don't even have to ask this question because I'm certain of it, but you were probably just like me and probably like most of the people in the chat room on the show today, that when you bought your first record, you cherished it, and you cherished every record you got after that. You had a paper route or whatever you did to make money.
Yes. And
you went out and I grew up in a little town in the Midwest, and it was like an appliance store. What was the Tom Hanks movie about the band that got discovered and became big? That Thing You Do. Remember,
right.
One of the kids in the band had a dad with an appliance store, and they sold stereos, and I think they sold records there. It even looked exactly like the appliance store in my hometown. I remember saving money and just running down there and getting a record. You'd come home and just drool all over the album cover, and you'd read the liner notes, and you would listen with such intensity and over and over and over again. And now I think that music is largely wallpaper, but I do know that, the younger generation, I now am, make myself sound old, which I am, but the kids today seem to have at least more attachment now than they did maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I think the pendulum has swung back a little, but during the Napster years, I didn't think the music industry would survive, frankly, and yet now it seems to flourish. Can you talk about? I don't know if you agree with me about that, but can you talk about that?
No, I do. I think the whole Napster period was something that the music industry resisted terribly. I think it was something that not only when it hit them were they not prepared for it, but when they saw that this was the direction that things were going to go, I think they resisted it at every move. The analogy I always use is those in the 60s you used to see those beach blanket bingo movies or whatever they were, and
right.
You'd see everybody having like a tug of war with 10 guys on one side with the rope and 10 guys on the other side, and one side inevitably would always fall into the sand.
Right.
Well, that was tech, and that was the record companies, and the record companies fell into the sand. Although this time, the only analogy I use in the metaphor is that they never let go of the rope for about 10 years.
Right.
And that was the era you're talking about. And, until streaming came along, they didn't know how to respond. And I think there's many reasons for that. I think their whole system, their whole way of operating was not only about, it was all about control. it was all about, the limited amount of music, like you talked about, that culturally we got and we cherished it and loved it. There were very few acts in comparison. There were very few, people that put music out. I mean, there was only 6 major labels and a couple of very significant independents. If you go back to like the 50s and 60s, there were a lot more independents. But as things moved on into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the independents all got swallowed up. And I think that when we talk about this era that you're speaking of specifically, yes, music changed because our access to it and the amount of it, and no longer were there gatekeepers. I mean, that was the good news to the artistic community, I think, is that, you could say to them, here's the good news, guys and gals, there's no more gatekeepers. There's nobody telling you, yes or no. And here's the bad news. There are no more gates.
Yeah, and so you have this glut of content, and just an incredible amount of stuff. And everybody, remember we used to hear the phrase crowdsourcing. I mean, 7 or 8 years ago, crowdsourcing. That didn't really work out that well, but I do know that most people, I would assume, I should say, most people go on Spotify and you pick what you're going to listen to if it's new and you're unfamiliar with it by looking at how many, what's the most popular thing on this new album, and that's where you go first. So I guess to some extent, crowdsourcing has worked in the long run, but with that freedom of no gatekeepers and that glut of content, it puts a tremendous burden. I don't think that artists were ready for it. It's like, we don't want gatekeepers. Oh, but now we have to do all the work. Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, and that was a transformation, and I saw that transformation. When you spoke just earlier about the Napster period, I remember that period very well, and it's interesting you bring that up because I was cleaning out some stuff about 2-3 weeks ago, and I came across an old issue of the A&R Registry, and it was my year-end issue that I wrote in 2004, December of 2004, and I read the letter in the to the subscribers, and I said in that letter, I said, the artist that's going to be successful in the future is going to be a different kind of person. And I went on to qualify that what I meant by that was that the kind of elements, the kind of things that were going to be required of an artist to be successful in terms of having a career in music were going to be entirely different than what had come before it. Because like you just said, Michael, I saw that all the systems that you and I knew, when you were making records, when you were engineering and making records for record companies, all those systems for signing talent and building it up were gone, or they were going in 2004. I mean, I saw that. Right. They were all being dismantled. The whole thing of tour support, the whole thing of, huge amounts of money, and the manager will take care of it, and the record company is the king, and it's all centered around the label, and it's all going to give you the money. All of that was dying. It was all dying, and it had been dying since, 2001. And what you saw was a complete dismantling, I think, of the traditional system that we saw. And from 2004, pretty much until 2010, I mean, we saw the whole industry really, really struggle to find its footing in the new world. Yeah, we had some successes, but it was still based on an old model. It was still based on, oh yeah, this is wonderful that Adele came along and sold 20 million albums. Nobody's done that in a decade. It was still predicated on a model from the past because nothing at that time had come in until streaming came in 2011 to take its place. Now we have, now radio's significance in spreading music is not as significant as it once was. As a matter of fact, radio's the last place that people go to. Radio has to be sold on the story in press, the story in online media, the story in video, the story with streaming before they add records these days. Right. So it's interesting that we look at, how do you discover things these days, and the whole crowdsourcing thing. I agree with you. In this day and age, and by the way, Michael, I don't believe this just about music. I believe it about television. I believe it about books. I believe that, the hardest thing to get from the American people or from anybody these days is their attention, because so many things are demanding it. And how many things do you give it to, and for how long? And you begin to see, in that kind of a world, how difficult it is to get people to pay attention to a release or to a new album or to a new single or to a new artist. And what are the parameters that you have to have in your life? How many times does somebody have to say, Michael, you've got to hear this? And I'll bet you your answer to me will be, well, Rich, it depends on who's saying it.
Well, it depends on who's telling me.
Yeah.
You know, if
exactly.
you were,
that's called a trusted source.
Yeah, absolutely. If you or Shirelli pick up the phone or shoot me an email and say, you got to hear this, I know I got to hear it. And going back to what you said earlier about how all those things that an artist needs to get radio interested now, you know, the story, the downloads, the streams, the social media. Well, I would make an argument, and this is why I love talking to you. Rich and I can totally disagree on something. I don't think I've ever had as many respectful disagreements maybe as I do with Rich, because he's just built that way, and we have great conversations. But I think that artists today that do get signed have exactly the same work ethic that artists that get, well, I shouldn't say artists that get signed, artists that have hits. No matter what form that comes in, whether it's with a major or they do it independently, they have the same work ethic and build that story. Just like 20 years ago, if you want to get signed to a label, a lot of people have the fantasy that they can write one great song as an act, and some impresario at a label will hear them and say, and sweep them up off their feet and, come on, kid, I'm going to make you a star, you know, a big fat guy with a cigar and a bald head and gold records behind him. I'm sure that has happened. The Star Maker thing did happen. But by, you know, the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, you had to have the story. You had to have a following, which generally meant that you could get 300 people lined up outside of a club, that people would follow you no matter where you went, quite literally. Like if you were on that, you know, Eastern Seaboard corridor from, you know, like Washington, D.C. up to New York City, you had to play all those clubs in that corridor. And if you could play all those clubs and get people to show up at all those clubs because you regularly went there, you started out with a handful of people, then it became 20, then it became 50, then it became 100, then it became 300 because you did marketing. You went to the next town the night before you played, you put posters up on telephone poles, you would beg local radio to do interviews with you. You did all that work yourself. Well, now people are doing it all via laptop on the internet, but most people think that it's just like they were deluded. The delusional people back then thought all I need is one great song and I've got a pretty face. I think people think today I can just record one song, put it on YouTube, and it's going to be so incredibly good people will discover me. They don't realize it's a 12-hour-a-day job, 6 or 7 days a week for 2 or 3 years before that happens. Is that a fair statement?
I completely agree with you. I couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons that one of the main drivers in my life is educating artists. I think this is so important, and I think it's important for the reasons that you're talking about, because one of the underlying reasons of your point is that there is so much volume out there. This isn't 20 years ago where the volume of music being put out, we all, if we followed the business, could probably keep up with it. Nobody has that ability to do that today. Nobody.
Right. I remember back when Rich was literally among the first 7 screeners at Taxi. It was Rich, Rob Shirelli, Skunk Baxter, Denise Oso, Barbara Vanderlyn, and a couple others, and Doug Minnick. And I remember standing in the kitchen and saying to my wife, who might have been my fiance at the time, saying something to the effect of, how did I describe it? I don't know. I felt like I was ushering in the demise of the music industry or something like that. And she looked at me and she said, "Don't flatter yourself, Michael." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "It's not you. It's technology that's changing everything, because now everybody has access to make the music, and that's the game changer." And she was so right about that. And she really knew nothing about the industry, but she was perceptive enough to see that on its face. So, you know,
I completely agree with her. And that has only happened exponentially more and more and more. And that's the scary part, is that, it's not only the technology, it's also the speed at which the technology changes the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, if I said to you in February, what's going to happen in the next 3 months, Michael, no one in this world has seen in their lifetime, you would have thought I was insane.
Right.
If I said to you, there's going to be a pandemic, there's going to be a global recession, there's going to be radical social upheaval in this country like we haven't seen in half a century, you would have said, what the fuck are you talking about? So, I mean, that's part of it. And I think that's very much in line with what your wife was saying, is that, the technology and the ability for us to know that and to see that and to be able to react to that. I mean, we can, we're talking here about music and about songwriters and about artists. Just look at the changes that they've gone through. Look at the changes and the ability that they have now, and the power that they have that they've never had before. But I think with that power comes a lot of responsibility and a lot more of the points that we were talking about before, which is that the responsibility of bringing yourself from, metaphorically from 0 to 50 is now on your shoulders. And that's a learning curve. That's a deep learning curve for a lot of people who are, as you say, delusional about what it takes to succeed in the business today.
Yeah, it's for a lot of people, the big hump is learning the technology, how to use Pro Tools or Logic and all the plugins and how to produce their own stuff. That is certainly an important part of it, and I recommend that everybody should do that. But the other part of it is all the marketing stuff that is all done online. And you can't market something bad and expect people to glom onto it. You can't make something great and not market it and expect people to glom onto it. It takes both.
I completely agree, and also it takes too much time. It takes so much time to do that. But yeah, you're right. You have to have a plan. You have to have an idea. And I think it's like I was discussing this about 2 weeks ago with my class. I was saying, do you know what the first question that anyone who puts music out, whether it's Sony or Warner's or Johnny on the internet, who is my audience?
Yeah.
Who is my audience? Who is it that I want to market this to? I mean, it sounds so simple to say that, but yet, a lot of people, I mean, when you ask a lot of artists, and I'm sure you've done this, Michael, when you ask them that, they haven't a clue. Oh, they have no idea who their audience is at all.
I go a step further and say, what kind of music do you do? And the answer is more often than not, I do rock, I do pop, I do a little R&B, I can do jazz. No, you have to narrow it down you have to define who you are, be able to articulate it, and know who the audience is that wants to eat what you're putting on the plate.
That's right. Otherwise, because in this market, if you don't do that, you might as well go into a room blindfolded and go, hello? 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 Is anyone there? I mean, that's metaphorically what you're doing if you don't do that.
Absolutely. By the way, I don't want to give out the last name because we're live, but our now mutual friend Ronnie that you told me to call.
Yeah.
I did call him and we spoke, had a really nice conversation. I know
wonderful.
I know his brother Kenny. I told him that. I know his nephew Lad, who
yes.
Yeah, who actually works in the office directly below the taxi office, and I see him like 4 days a week in the parking lot. And have known him for easily 10 or 15 years. So he was delighted to hear all that, and he told me next time I'm in town to give him a heads up before I get there, and we'll go grab dinner or something. So thank you for...
How lovely. I'm so glad to hear that. That's fantastic.
Which brings me to a point that you and I really haven't spoken about, but our mutual friend that we're talking about right now, I just don't want to give out his last name because people may hunt him down and say, sign me. Let's just say it's probably the most beloved music publisher in the industry. I've never, and being in the industry for 40 years, I've never heard anybody say anything but really kind remarks about this guy. He's just a nice man. He's a mensch.
Very.
Yep.
Very.
And
always was. Still is.
Yep, absolutely. And so he's involved with a company that, among other things, will use artificial intelligence to do A&R, to identify hits anyway. And that's been tried before. A couple of times there have been companies that have stuff that worked decently well. I would say now we're probably 7 or 8 years further down the road with AI. Wow, military helicopters flying by outside, that's never a good sign. And I'm not talking not just...
There's an assuring sign.
Yeah, not just one of them. Oh, look, there's a guy with a machine gun hanging out the door. Anyway, AI for A&R. I remember the last company that tried it got the same kind of resistance I did with some A&R people at record labels. They thought, gee, well, if you guys at Taxi can do A&R independently, what does that mean for my job security? And the same thing happened when somebody I know from New York years ago rolled out a thing that was an AI-driven, very early AI, A&R tool or music discovery tool, and then it became which song should be the single tool. And that didn't get a lot of love in the industry because I think people feared it, just as we all fear robots taking our jobs kind of across the board. How do you feel about that whole thing?
Well, it's an interesting question because I have followed this whole movement, and there's a couple companies. Warner Music actually invested in one of these companies, gave a $4 million investment to them, and operates with it in England. But it's not quite. I think the important thing to answer this question is that you have to identify what these technologies are. The one that Ronnie's working with is looking at elements of songs and has an algorithm or an element that will give you a certain predictability of which ones could be hits in the market.
Right.
How successful it is, I don't really know. The one that Warner's uses is something that's tied in to 100 or 200 different data points on the internet. Response, social media, video play, engagement, streaming services, video, YouTube, all of these different elements to give A&R people an indication of who's getting attention. Those are two entirely different technologies when you talk about, predicting hits. I'm also of the belief that, you can have indicators of what a hit record would be, but that's sort of like in the here and now. I'm not so sure that it would tell you, is this worth signing? I mean, is this really worth investing the kind of time, money, and energy to sign the artist based on this? That's the part that I'm not sure of. Even if their technology that you're talking about works, where they can identify a hit record and say this will be a hit record.
Right.
You know as well as I do, Michael, there's 100 other... Clive Davis used to always say this about A&R. He used to say, if all it took was just a great voice or, a great hit song, if that's all it took for somebody to have... He said, everybody would have a hit career.
Yep.
Everybody would. He says it's maybe one or two in a list of about 15 things of what makes something successful and why it's successful. I mean, timing, the culture, these are all things that I don't know if technology yet can predict in terms of, putting that into what will be successful. I mean, look at, like we were saying before, look at the world we're living in now. How is that going to be predicting the kinds of songs that will be successful in the next, 3, 4, 5 months? We're in a radically different era today than we were back then.
Absolutely. I think that the technology that scans the internet and looks for all the social engagement cues, that sort of stuff, that seems viable to me because, as you and I are both keenly aware, sometime around, 2000 to 2003, somewhere in that window, labels started hiring people whose title was A&R research. And they would come to work. These people couldn't hear a hit if it jumped up and bit them on the butt. But what they were good at was scouring the internet, looking for those same cues that the software, AI, will find. They would look for, are they getting a buzz on this playlist? Are they, playlist didn't exist then, but, are they showing up in chat rooms? Are they showing up in forums? Are people talking about them? What's the demographic of the people that are talking about them? Do they point to any particular song that seems to be hot? Are they just a regional act? Are they, capable of being a national act? All those kind of social cues, if you will. I think AI is probably going to be very capable of making that a much more efficient process. But you're right, that identifies somebody that has a small bonfire going, and a label's job is to pour gasoline on that fire and take it wide. Um, then the question becomes: can the
no, I agree with you.
will the labels team? Because this, you and I both know that this is critically important. Part of the job of an A&R person was to get, the product managers and the radio reps, all those people under the roof at the label, excited about the band you're about to sign, or that you just did sign, or the record you just finished, keeping them involved in the process, making them feel an emotional connection. Because if you didn't get all those people at the label excited, you could make the greatest record in the world and they just wouldn't move on it. Also true statement?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, no. I always say the three jobs of an A&R person were to find and sign the talent, and make the record. That's the first thing. The second part of the A&R person's job at a label, which most people don't talk about, the second and the third, the second part of the A&R person's job was to build and maintain the careers of the artists that were already signed to the label.
Right.
That's an enormous part of it. That's finding the songs for the next Katy Perry record. That's finding the producers and the writers that are going to be the right people to work with on that artist's second or third album. And the third function is the one that you just said, which is absolutely crucial and requires an enormous amount of relationship building and people skills, and that is getting all of the departments at a label very, very excited. Now, that's much easier said than done. Number one. Number two, it's easier to do that at an independent label than it is at a major.
Right.
But when you're at Columbia or you're at Atlantic and you've got, 13 or 14 A&R people in a department, it's hard. It's hard, you have to have, and that's a skill that is separate from what we're talking about. That's a skill that's separate from talent identification or record making. That's relationship making. And I agree with you 100%, Michael. That's absolutely crucial these days, especially in the marketplace for the reasons we're talking about and have mentioned in this conversation. It's even more important because there's so much product out there.
Maybe we're going back to Clive Davis now. What made him such an all-star A&R person is, and eventually a label head, is that Clive understood that. He understood finding the right act, finding the right songs for the right act, getting the right producer with the right act, making the right record, getting the people at the label excited about it. He understood all those processes. There are a lot of people that can say, yeah, that sounds like a hit to me, but if they don't have to deal with the artist manager, to deal with the producer, to deal with the psychological aspects of the artist,
Yeah.
Just if you've ever seen, the Whitney Houston documentary, it's a pretty good inside look at what life was like behind the scenes with her. She would have been tough. I think there was a golden heart at her core, but she was messed up enough, and the people surrounding her, to be able to keep somebody signed to the label, keep them happy, make your numbers as far as sales and radio and everything. That's, wow, what a job, So you need somebody that's got that depth of experience that can do that. It's not just a young person that says, man, this is the next hot band.
No, absolutely. We started this conversation by talking about Clive, and I'll tell you one of the biggest, most important and profound lessons I ever learned from Clive Davis regarding A&R was the following. He said to me, you got to remember, he said, you see all these deals, you see these huge producers who make, huge hit records, and labels rush to give them a label deal. He said, let me tell you something. There's an enormous amount of difference between somebody who can walk into a club, see a Whitney Houston on the stage, and say, that's a great artist. There's an enormous amount of difference between saying that and then the following sentence, and I know exactly the kind of record we need to be making for her to break her as an act.
Yep.
That is what he says is what so many of these people don't get. He said, years ago, he was approached by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis when they were having all those hits with Janet Jackson and Robert Palmer and Human League and this one. Duran Duran. Everybody was having hits with their songs. they approached Clive to get a label deal. And back in those days, label deals, you're talking about committing, between $30 and $60 million. You're talking staff, you're talking signings, you're talking off. I mean, it's a lot of money when you talk about that. So you better really believe in it. He said he was approached by them, and he was approached by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and at the same time he was approached by L.A. Reid and Babyface for what was to become LaFace. Mm-hmm. And he said he turned down Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis because he said, while I felt that they were incredible record makers, if they had a Janet Jackson and they could deliver on that, he said, when I sat in the meetings and listened to the songs and to the acts that they wanted to sign, he said it was like a disconnect, and their thinking was, they could write the hits for these people, and it's like they didn't get the whole pack. They didn't get all of the elements together. He said, when I had the conversations with Antonio Reid and Kenny, he said it totally made sense to me. He said, I listened to the acts that they wanted to sign. I got what those acts were about. I understood that, they had an understanding of not only talent, but the kind of records that you needed to make in order to break them. And he said, and that's why I did the deal with LaFace and turned down, a lot of other people, big people who came to me who wanted label deals, was because of that. And that is something I have never, ever, ever, ever forgotten. I mean, we still see that kind of thing today, where, some big producer, I forget who it was, some enormous producer in the last several years did some deal with, I think, Universal or Sony, and it was like a $60-70 million deal. And no big hit records ever came out of it. No big hit artists.
Wow.
I mean, only because this producer, who will remain nameless, had enormous amounts of hits with people. But again, we come back to that same principle. There's a big difference between writing hit songs and producing hit records and running a successful label. And if you think I'm wrong, try doing it. you learn the hard way,
You're definitely not wrong.
Millions of dollars later.
So let me ask you, we've only got 8 minutes left. If you were an artist starting out today and you felt confident about your writing, confident about your performance, maybe you're getting 1,000, 2,000 views on your YouTube stuff, you've got a little bit of a fire going. What would you do if you wanted to become the next big thing? What are the steps that you would recommend?
Well, a couple things. I mean, notwithstanding that we're living in a COVID era,
I
would build my live performance. That's something that I would definitely do. And I know that that's on hold for the temporary future right now. I get it. But that is something that I think is absolutely crucial. I think that if an artist doesn't have that, and I've seen this happen in the business, where a new artist that comes along has some heat going, like you're describing, gets something going, but they don't have the performance skills. The marketing machine at the label is literally cut in half, not because they want it to be, but because there's no way to deliver on that. And you find it very, very difficult to build an artist's career who doesn't have the live skills. I mean, that's what I think The Weeknd had. He had the performance skills. He had all of that. He had 3 albums under his belt. The other thing that I would do is I would constantly record. I would constantly be writing and recording and putting music out. The other thing, Michael, that I would do if I was an artist today, I would stop thinking in old models. I would stop thinking that, the world is waiting for my album. I think that's a ludicrous assumption. No one for a new artist, no one is waiting for an album today. They're not waiting for Beyonce's album. A single maybe, and we know this because when they put the albums out, there's no monetary benefit anymore, even for Beyonce. It's free. It's on Spotify. You can hear it and listen to it whenever you want. So my point is that I don't think you should be thinking in terms of albums until you have an audience. To me, I would be spending time as an artist building my online relationship to my audience. That's what I would be doing. I would be identifying my audience and then super feeding them a single, a remix, maybe a live chat, maybe an acoustic version of a song, maybe streaming. I would keep in touch with them. I would build my relationship. That's the most important thing. And even in the era when you can't be performing live, I think you need to be building your relationship, whether that's online. And by the way, when I say online, I think that that's something every artist needs to determine for themselves. Not all online platforms are the same.
Right.
I don't think that social media is a generic term. I really don't. I think Facebook is an entirely different platform than Instagram. I think Instagram appeals to an entirely different group than Twitter. And you need to know as an artist, depending on who you're trying to reach, where your audience is social media-wise.
Which
because
gets
just
right
setting
back
up
to
7
what,
accounts on 7 different platforms is useless unless you know what you're doing.
and you made the
And even
point
then,
earlier,
if you know what you're doing, you're not on 7. You're on 1 or 2, and you're really giving it a strong focus.
which goes back to knowing who your audience is, their demographic.
Exactly.
Are they male, female, or
Exactly.
both? Are they 18 to 25? Are they 26 to 35? Are they 55? I do believe, I've got to say, with all the things in our former world of the music industry being upended, there's never been a better time for people, and I can't think of a more kind way to say this, but people who are unattractive and older. I mean, those used to be 2 mortal sins. If you brought an act
Right.
into to anybody in an A&R department or VP of A&R or the president of a label, and they heard a smash hit song, the next thing out of their mouth every time is, what do they look like?
Yeah. And video stopped that, especially in the early 80s.
Yeah. So nowadays, I think that the public is much more open to artists who, they can be attractive because of their personality. They can be attractive because of what's inside of them. It doesn't have to be a physical thing anymore. And
I
that,
completely agree.
back in our day, if you were, I used to say they would sign an act in utero if they could. Now
Right.
it's like you could be a 42-year-old artist and still have a hit because people care more about the music, which is nice, and it's because you can address your niche more effectively than ever before.
Yes, and that's because we have access to that. We have access to more music. I mean, the greatest commercial example of what you're talking about to me was Adele. And I remember in an interview where she addressed that, she said, I totally went against the grain when I broke. I wasn't this thin, attractive woman who was leading with her sexuality in an artistic sense, who, dancers and all of that. She said, I was just somebody who was, this overweight, plain woman who was just, singing. But that is what I think drew people to her, because she was unlike anything that was out there. This was like something totally different.
Yep.
And she was just singing from the heart and singing songs that people connected with. And it connected in a way that was just enormous. I mean, 25 million albums. And the following album, when she put out the 25 album, they asked her in her first interview, they said, what was your greatest fear about this record? She said, my greatest fear was that as we got closer and closer, I thought, nobody's going to care. It's going to die and go into the garbage heap, and nobody's going to care.
Wow.
But, to your point, Michael, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And an audience that, we're going to see, I think, I'll end with this. I think we're going to see more artists who reach more people who the public at large does not know than any other time in our past. More people are going to have careers in the music business who aren't stars, who aren't big names, but who are making a viable living in the business.
Absolutely. Man, I couldn't agree more with that because, the days of 20, 30 million albums, really, really rare. The only way to make significant income as an act is by touring, and the only way to get a big enough audience that you can tour to those kinds of numbers is persistence, number one, and building it all up online to the point where, look, Billie Eilish, great example, I guess, of how she just, caught fire online and can sell out a big room now.
And they built that, though, for 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Long before the public ever heard of her, they built that single, by song, by video, by single. There were 13 songs that she had put out the previous 3 years, and an EP. Most people don't even know that, prior to her breaking with Bad Guy.
I made a suggestion on a previous episode of Taxi TV as far as building engagement with your audience, and that is while you're making the record, and I'm sure this isn't my idea, I'm just repeating somebody else's here, but why not do live stream of yourself in the studio recording parts, and every now and then turn around to the camera and say, do you guys like it better with this note on the harmony stack or that note on the harmony stack? Let the audience really develop an engagement and an attachment to the project so that they then do what Seth Godin, who's the marketing guy, always says, yeah, you need to be remarkable. And that doesn't mean like amazing remarkable. It means that one person remarks about it to another. So
yes. I love him.
Yeah, the tools. I'm actually reading one of his books right now. Just read it this morning over my English muffin. Anyway, Rich, man, if you and I were roommates, we would never sleep because we'd be up till like 5 o'clock in the morning having these conversations all the time. I so enjoy our time together and our conversations, and I can't believe I've never had you on the show before.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I so appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to have you back sooner than later. Tell everybody where they... By the way, I mentioned this before you were on with us. Ritch is the purveyor of the music registry. He and I started out in the industry. Well, he started the music registry. It was called the A&R 411 back then. Around the same time I started Taxi. So we've kind of grown up in parallel together. But it's a great tool for the people that have the wherewithal to make the phone calls, send the emails, know the etiquette, because, you can shoot yourself in the foot. Just because you've got some important person's email address doesn't mean that they're not sitting there waiting for you, and you can do a lot of stupid stuff to blow it before, You can ruin yourself with that address just as well as you can help yourself, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
But go ahead and give them your website so people can go check it out.
Sure. It's musicregistry.com. That's all one word, musicregistry.com. And all the information is there, and any questions you have, you can just, call us or ask us, but just go to musicregistry.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's free, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Rich, thank you so much for doing this. Can't wait to have you back soon. Maybe someday you and I and Bud should do a panel at the Road Rally. That would be
I would love that. I would love that. That would be fantastic. It'd be great to see Bud and be with him again.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, buddy.
You too. Take care. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you go. Hope you guys liked that. A little different topically than most of our shows. And sadly, we didn't talk about fish, gophers, or the fact that I'm growing tomatoes and my hands smell like manure. But, some episodes just have to be like purely informational. So thank you all for watching. I have no idea what I'm going to do tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow we should do something I tried to do earlier in the week, I think, or last week, at the end of last week, which is call some members. So if you have questions, get them ready, and tomorrow we'll call some folks, okay? That's it. Thank you for watching. It was a pleasure hanging out with you, and we will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Once again, don't be late for another exciting episode of Taxi's Quarantini Happy Hour. Yeah, baby.